Now, the Central Powers, or Germany and Austria-Hungary and anyone else that wanted to join the cause, were very confident of a swift and total victory against Russia and France. And the strategy of the Central Powers is pretty simple. They were going to march from Germany west to defeat France, and then they were going to turn east and head to Russia and defeat Russia. Pretty simple strategy. We'll march west to France and defeat the French, and then we'll turn and go back east and go to Russia and defeat the Russians, and this whole thing will be over. Well, the shortest route for Germany to get to France was through the country of Belgium. Okay, the shortest route for Germany to get to France was through Belgium. And Belgium was a neutral country. So do you really think Belgium wants to get involved in this mess? Do you think Belgium's going to want Germany to march through their country to get to France? No. But Germany tried to do it the right way. They requested permission from King Albert of Belgium to go through their country on the way to France. And they even guaranteed, hey, if there's any damages to your country, if anything happens during our march through Belgium, we'll pay for it, we'll fix it right, etc. So Germany requests permission from King Albert of Belgium to move their troops through his country to France, even offering Belgium payment for any damages that might result in their march through the country. Well, King Albert, as expected, refused the German request. And he said, quote, "Belgium is a country, not a road." And basically what he's saying is he doesn't want to get involved. Which you can see the point. So King Albert of Belgium refuses the German request to go through Belgium, even if they're going to pay for damages, stating publicly, quote, "Belgium is a country, not a road." And so the Germans respect his wishes and don't go through Belgium, right? No, actually on August 3rd of 1914, despite King Albert's objection, Germany invades Belgium. They were just going to go through. Now they're invading. So again, on August 3rd of 1914, despite King Albert's objection, German forces now invade Belgium. There's a difference between invasion and just marching through. So on August 3rd, 1914, despite King Albert's objection, German forces invade Belgium. Well, who gets in the war now? Not yet. Great Britain. Because Great Britain, the next day on August 4th, hearing that Germany has invaded Belgium because they are committed to the defense of Belgium, Great Britain declares war on Germany. So the next day on August 4th, 1914, Great Britain, who's committed to defend Belgium, now declares war on Germany. So all three members of the Triple Entente have declared war against Germany, correct? France, Russia, now Great Britain. Well, people start taking sides because they can see there's a war. And within just a few weeks, the country of Turkey joins the Central Powers. The country of Turkey joins the Central Powers. And you have to, we said how weird it was that Russia was on the same side, right? Russia was on the same side as Great Britain and France, which was unusual in today's terms. What country would most likely not ally with Great Britain, France, and Russia? If you think about modern history, especially World War II. What country is going to side? And they were a huge problem for us in World War II. Japan. Very good. So during this time, Turkey joins the Central Powers, while the country of Japan unites with Great Britain, France, and Russia. So now the Central Powers consist of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Turkey. This new alliance between Japan, Great Britain, France, and Russia, this alliance now becomes known as the Allies. So you're going to have the Allies versus the Central Powers in World War I. So the alliance between Japan, Great Britain, France, and Russia will be known as the Allies. So in this war, the Great War, World War I, you're going to have the Central Powers versus the Allies. Okay? So that takes us right straight to our next subtopic, which is American neutrality. Because what are we trying to do in America? Stay neutral. Because we don't want to mess. We'll talk about that. So American neutrality. Now, President Wilson is sitting back watching all of this and hearing about all of this, and although he considers Germany a lawless nation, he's going to favor the Allies in this conflict. It's like your favorite football team, okay? But you don't want to really play the game, you just want to have a favorite. Well, he sees Germany as a lawless nation, a nation without laws, do whatever you want, a bully nation. And as a result of that, in his mind, President Wilson is favoring the Allies. Obviously, he doesn't have all the facts, but he's thinking, well, we got France and Great Britain and Japan and Russia on that side. They're kind of friendly with us, so we'd probably favor them because we think Germany is a lawless nation. Just do whatever they want. The thing was that Wilson didn't understand is he believed that the Allies could win this conflict without American support. He had confidence in Great Britain, Russia, Japan, and France to beat the Central Powers without their support. So he wanted to remain neutral. He really believed that at first, that the Allies could win without the support of the United States. So he adopted a policy of formal neutrality. Okay? So because President Wilson believes that the Allies can win without the support of the United States, he develops a policy of formal neutrality, which tells the world what, Andy? We're going to remain neutral. We're going to let them take care of their own business over there in Europe. Well, you got to remember, especially in 1914, the United States is a nation of immigrants. And there are emotional ties on where their ancestors came from. And this resulted in a lot of mixed feelings on which side we should support in this conflict, even though we are not going to get involved. So we're going to give you some examples of how Americans took sides in this European conflict, even though we're not fighting in it. And it's pretty simple. The first example is if your ancestors came from Great Britain, who were you going to support? The Allies. Right. And there were a lot of people in the United States whose ancestors came from Great Britain. Anybody in here know that your ancestors came from Great Britain? Well, your people, yeah, you'd probably support the Allies. How about those Americans whose ancestors came from Germany? They're going to support the Central Powers. Their feelings are going to be for the Central Powers. These are Americans now. Obviously, if your ancestors came from Austria or Hungary, Central Powers. And you have immigrants from all these countries, Great Britain, etc. How about if you are an Irish American? Who are you going to favor? Why? Yeah, but you don't know much about the relationship between Ireland and England. It's not very good. Not very good. So even though Irish Americans don't particularly like Germany, they hate Great Britain. So they side with the Central Powers. Okay? So again, Irish Americans favored the German cause. They didn't have any real love for Germany, but they certainly had a dislike for Great Britain. Now, because Ireland didn't get along with Great Britain at the time, there was a rivalry within that area, and so they hated the British. So they would favor the Germans just because they hate the British, you know what I mean? They didn't really love the Germans, but they hated the British, okay? Now, this one is really going to be different for you to try to understand, and you'll get more into this next year. American Jews, who do they side with? Why would they side with Germany?
Because they have problems with them.
That's right. They hated Russia. So how ironic is that the Jewish people of America, and probably Jewish people around the world, would have been favoring Germany at this time because they hated Russia, and as Emily said, not knowing what was in store for them when Adolf Hitler takes over the country in the late 1930s. How ironic is that? Incredibly ironic. And when you go to the Holocaust Museum next year and see that, you'll even wonder more about it. Okay? So, we give you some examples. Obviously, you don't have to write stuff like this down, but French people with French ancestry are going to support the Allies, Russia, etc. Okay? But anyway, those are some specific points. Now, the next subtopic is important you understand, and that was the controversy that surrounded submarine warfare in World War I. Okay? The controversy that surrounded submarine warfare in World War I. Controversy surrounding submarine warfare. Anybody know what another name for a submarine was? A U-boat. And that's on your ID sheet. Another name for a submarine at the time, and still today, is a U-boat. You ever watched the movie U-571? Anybody seen that movie where they're trying to get these decoders and they take over this German U-boat? If you get bored sometime, watch U-571. It's a pretty good movie. Anyway, now, what happened, the reason there was a controversy is because Germany was using their submarines not only for war tactics, but they were also attacking Allied ships. Okay? Which was a violation of international law. And we'll tell you why it was. So Germany was using their submarines to attack Allied ships and violated international law. Was it a violation of international law to attack enemy ships? No, but there was a rule that went with that if you did. Anybody know what the rule was at the time that Germany was not obeying? It was okay to attack an enemy ship with your submarine, but what did you have to do? You had to give them a warning before you did, so why?
So they can attack.
The crew could get off. Very good. That was the international rule. If you're going to attack a ship with a submarine, you have to give a warning, and so the crew can jump overboard or whatever and get off the ship, because your goal wasn't so much to kill people as it was to ruin the Allied ship. Does that make sense? So at that time in history, there was an international law that required any ship to give warning to another ship before attacking, so you could give the ship's crew a chance to escape. Well, that worked well when ships were fighting ships, because they both were above surface and vulnerable equally, right? Well, these German subs, how are you going to warn a ship that you got to get yourself to the surface, and then you're a sitting duck? So they had no interest in that. That's why they didn't do it. So submarines, these German submarines said, we're not going to give a warning, for crying out loud. We'd have to surface to the top and be a lot more vulnerable. How much can you shoot out of a submarine when they're surfaced? That's not what they're made for. They're made to shoot when they're under the water. So they became very vulnerable. So again, German U-boats refused to use the warning because they would be forced to surface to give such warning, which would make them very vulnerable. So they tried to follow the rules. So what might they do, Josh, to cover their butts? To say they're following international law. I do this sometimes, but so I'm upset because Rachel isn't paying attention in class. So what do? I warn all of you. By God now, because Rachel's not paying attention, if any of you guys aren't paying attention, this is what's going to happen, even though Lisa's back there paying attention like crazy. So kind of what the Germans said is, well, we're not going to surface, so we're just going to tell you right now, we're sinking any Allied ships without warning. They give kind of a blanket warning. Instead of warning Andy when I'm going to sink him, or warning Sully when I'm going to sink her, we're just telling the whole class, you better not get in our way because we're going to sink you. That's your warning. So be prepared, which really isn't a warning, is it? I mean, it is, but it isn't, because how do you know where the submarine is, right? And they're not going to surface and tell you, right? So basically what the Germans did, instead of issuing a warning prior to each engagement, they simply gave a blanket international warning stating that any ship that entered any war zone around any of these Allied countries, we're going to sink you. So don't do it. Okay? Why would that concern us? Absolutely. President Wilson sat back there going, well, That's not going to work, because if we go into this war zone around Great Britain, for example, to trade, we're going to get sunk, right? So the president says this is unacceptable. This blanket warning's not going to work. This is going to cut off trade between the United States and mainly Great Britain, but could France and Russia and Japan, although we didn't trade a lot with those particular countries. Well, what's going to force the United States to get angry? If they sink a ship and American citizens lose their lives, right? So, German submarines continue, and finally that occurs. On March 28th of 1950, on March 28th of 1950, a German submarine sank a British ship called the Thalaba, and 1 American died. On March 28, 1915, a German submarine sank a British liner called the Thalaba. Now, what's a liner?
Like a
Passenger ship, and 1 American was killed. Well, we didn't get too wound up about that, although we weren't happy about it, right? However, on May 7th of 1915, less than 2 months later, May 7th, 1915, another German U-boat sank another British passenger ship called the Lusitania. Heard of that?
Yeah.
The Lusitania, and 124 Americans were killed. Now we have a problem. So on May 7th of 1915, another German U-boat sank a British passenger ship called the Lusitania, and it killed 124 Americans. Now, how could Germany justify shooting down a damn passenger, or shooting out a passenger liner and killing that many people? They were carrying contraband, yeah, weapons. So that's what they said. They claimed that this British liner, the Lusitania, was carrying contraband. Those would be weapons and those types of things that neutral nations are not supposed to be giving to warring nations. Okay? And they claimed with these Americans aboard that America had put contraband, weapons, etc. on the Lusitania, and they believed they were justified in sinking it. Now, Wilson knew there was no contraband on that British liner, and he sharply warned Germany to halt their actions. Okay? He sharply warns Germany to halt their actions. He also stated that if another incident of violence by the Germans against the Americans at sea would result in problems for Germany. Didn't say exactly what, but basically said, any more Americans lose their lives on the high seas as a result of your actions against ships, either ours or Allied ships, we will not tolerate them. And do you think the Germans listened? They actually did, because they knew that they would have a less chance of winning this conflict if what? If America got involved. So for 2 years, they cooled it. They kind of stayed off the high seas as far as those types of ships. They only used submarine warfare sparingly because they did not want to provoke the United States into the war on the side of the Allies, because they knew that would not be in their best interest. So they listened to Wilson. He kind of got after him, and they cooled it, so to speak. And the next 2 years, they limited that submarine warfare because they did not want to bring the United States in. Okay, that's going to take us to a presidential election of 1960 in the middle of this conflict in Europe that we're not quite involved in yet. So what's the campaign going to be all about? War. Yeah, whether we're going to be in war or not. Perfect. Okay? So, election of 1960. Now, the Democrats are going to nominate President Wilson for re-election, and they push him as the president that's the peace candidate. That if you keep President Wilson in office, he will continue this American neutrality, and America will stay out of this conflict in Europe. So he was campaigned on as the peace candidate. The Republican Party nominated Charles Evans Hughes for president, and the Democrats labeled him as the war candidate. Okay? So the Republican, it's on your sheet. So the Republican Party nominates Charles Evans Hughes for the presidency, and the Democrats attack him right away and list him as the war candidate. If you elect this guy, you're going to be in war in Europe. So the Democrats campaign completely on, hey, our guy, President Wilson, is the peace candidate. He'll keep us out of war. He'll save American lives. Let those people deal with their own problems over there. And when the Republicans nominated Charles Evans Hughes for president, the Democrats came out right away and said, here's your war candidate. By God, if you want war, this is your guy. So historians thought this election would not be very close at all. And actually, it was very close. Very close. Now, see if you kiddos know this. If we have a presidential election, we start projecting who the winner is going to be. And where do we start? Where do the votes get counted first? Because of the time zone difference. East. So they start counting them at the east, and they start moving westward. Okay, right? So, in the early returns in both the north and the east sections of the country, Wilson actually was trailing by a pretty large margin. So when they were counting the votes in the east and the north, still waiting for the south and the west, the late returns, Wilson was getting beaten by a pretty good margin. And Charles Evans Hughes actually went to bed on election eve believing he would be the next president of the United States. He had such a good lead early with the east and north, he didn't think that the south could turn enough, or the west, to give Wilson a comeback victory. So he went to bed on election eve believing he would be the next president of the United States. He was